Welcome back to another deep dive. Today we're traveling back to Tudor England, a world of grand feasts and elaborate etiquette, but also some surprisingly relatable food anxieties.
Yeah, the Tudors were a lot like us when it came to food.
To help guide us through this culinary time capsule, we have culinary historian Brigitte Webster with us.
She's the author of the amazing book Eating with the Tudors, Food and Recipes.
And she doesn't just study Tudor food,
No, she recreates it.
she lives it.
She even grows some of her own ingredients using traditional methods.
It's like stepping into a time machine.
Exactly.
So let's start with the four humors.
Okay.
Brigitte explains that for the Tudors, good health was all about balancing these four bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile.
Right. A completely different way of thinking about health and digestion than we have today.
And initially, people were advised to eat foods that matched their dominant humor, but then later on, the advice flipped. They were told to eat the opposite to achieve balance.
It really makes you think how much of dietary advice, even today, is based on solid science versus evolving trends.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, food also played a big role in Tudor social dynamics. They had these things called sumptuary laws, which dictated how many dishes people could serve at a meal based on their social standing.
It was a way of controlling consumption, but also aspirations.
But people found ways to work around the rules.
Of course.
They would invite guests of higher status to justify a more lavish meal.
It shows how food can be used to signal status and identity.
So true. All right, now let's talk about meat, the star of the Tudor table.
Yes, but even within meats, there was a hierarchy.
Venison was at the very top. It was a marker of wealth and privilege.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just about the type of meat either. The age of the animal also played a role.
So a dish of veal would be considered more prestigious than a dish of beef.
Fascinating how they paid attention to those subtle nuances.
And one thing that surprised me was the rarity of goat meat in Tudor England. It was very prevalent on the continent, but not so much in England.
It's a bit of a historical mystery.
It is. Now, while meat was definitely the centerpiece, we do see a shift happening. White meats, as they called them, gradually became more fashionable,
Milk, cheese, butter, things like that.
which were initially considered poor man's food, but they slowly gained acceptance among the upper classes.
The influx of foreign cheese, like Parmesan, seems to have been a big influence.
And just like with meat, there were different categories of cheese, each with its own level of prestige.
Hard, soft, green.
The longer it took to produce a cheese, the more expensive it became.
It was about showcasing good taste.
Now let's move on to fish. You might think it was just a religious obligation, but it was much more than that.
Yep.
Economic concerns around the meat supply led to Elizabeth III reintroducing fish days, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays.
Even after the Reformation.
Exactly. And she turned it into a clever strategy. She repurposed the Navy into fishermen during peacetime, increasing fish availability and stimulating demand. So we've talked about how the Tudors viewed food and the things that shaped their diets, but what was it actually like to eat Tudor food? Was it as bland as some people imagine?
Well, that's where Brigitte's experience recreating Tudor recipes provides invaluable insights.
And what she's discovered is that the Tudors had a much more sophisticated understanding of taste combinations than we might give them credit for.
They didn't have the variety of ingredients that we do today, but they were incredibly resourceful.
Brigitte actually tells this great story about a fish plate, which is a sweetened fish paste.
Doesn't sound very appetizing.
I know, right? But she says it's surprisingly delicious.
Yeah.
Even her husband, who's a pretty adventurous eater, was impressed.
So maybe we shouldn't judge a Tudor recipe by its title.
Exactly. All right, so let's talk about the seasonality of Tudor food. Each season presented its own set of challenges and opportunities.
They really had to work with nature
Spring was a time of extremes.
in terms of weather and food availability.
Exactly. There was Lent, where they had to abstain from meat, and then Easter, which brought a return to abundance.
A real fluctuation in food availability.
It was also a crucial time to plant seeds for the coming months.
Yeah, plan ahead.
Summer was the season of abundance, but there was still this awareness of the need to prepare for the leaner months ahead.
They had to preserve food, drying, pickling, salting.
And the introduction of sugar really transformed food preservation.
Jams, marmalades, and conserves became possible.
Imagine having strawberries in the middle of winter. It must have felt like magic.
And they even thought sugar was a miracle cure for all sorts of ailments.
So summer was all about abundance and preparation. What about winter?
Winter was a time to rely on those stored and preserved foods.
Things like preserved meats, dried fruits, pickled vegetables, and lots of fish.
They were even skilled at storing apples and pears.
Brigida even found mentions of old apples being given as gifts in privy accounts.
They were a real treat in the depths of winter.
It's fascinating to think about the challenges they faced and how they made sure they had food on the table year-round.
Brigida is actually still trying to recreate those Tudor techniques for storing apples.
She's tried everything, packing them in hay, storing them in the loft, but no luck yet.
Those Tudors must have had some secret methods.
They must have.
It really shows how ingenious they were. It really highlights the ingenuity and adaptability of Tudor cooks. You know, they didn't have modern technology to rely on, so they had to develop these incredibly clever methods for preserving food.
It's almost like they had a deeper connection to the natural world and how to work with its rhythms.
Right. And it makes you wonder if we've lost something in our modern world of instant gratification and year-round availability.
I think you're right. Maybe there's a certain value in rediscovering those lost arts of preservation and appreciating the seasonality of food.
Absolutely.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about Brigida's hands-on experience with recreating Tudor recipes.
Yeah, it's one thing to read about them, but it's another to actually try them out.
Exactly. And Brigida has made it her mission to do just that. She's spent years researching and experimenting with these recipes, and what she's found is that there's so much more to Tudor food than meets the eye.
Or the taste buds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of her key takeaways is to never judge a Tudor recipe by its title.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she's encountered some combinations that sound downright strange to modern ears, but when she actually tried them, they turned out to be surprisingly delicious.
It's a great reminder that taste is subjective and can evolve over time.
Absolutely. And Brigida has this really fun approach to testing out these recipes. She doesn't tell her family what's in the dish. She just serves it up and lets them be the judges.
Oh, that's fun.
And more often than not, they're pleasantly surprised.
It's like a blind taste test for history.
Exactly. One dish that really stands out is this thing called a fish blade.
A fish blade?
Yeah, it's essentially a sweetened fish paste.
Okay, that doesn't sound too appetizing.
I know, right? But Brigida swears it's delicious. Even her husband, who she describes as an adventurous eater, was impressed.
Wow, so it just goes to show that we shouldn't dismiss these historical dishes without giving them a try.
Exactly. Tudor cooks were incredibly skilled at combining flavors and creating dishes that were both satisfying and surprisingly complex.
They were masters at using local and seasonal ingredients.
Right. And that's a lesson we can all learn from, especially in today's world, where we're increasingly disconnected from the sources of our food.
Absolutely.
And if you're intrigued by all of this and want to try some of these Tudor recipes for yourself, I highly recommend checking out Brigida's book.
Yes, it's a great way to connect with history on a sensory level.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, we can learn a thing or two from them about how to appreciate the simple pleasures of good food and the importance of eating in harmony with the seasons.
So before we wrap up our deep dive, let's shift our focus to the broader significance of Tudor food culture. What can we learn from them beyond just the recipes and ingredients?
I think one of the most important takeaways is their deep connection to the land and the rhythms of nature.
Right, they couldn't just go to the supermarket for whatever they wanted whenever they wanted it.
Exactly. They had to plan ahead, preserve their harvest, and make the most of what they had. And that fostered a sense of respect for food and a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of all living things.
It's a stark contrast to our modern world where food is often seen as a commodity.
I agree. We've become so disconnected from the natural world that we often forget where our food comes from.
It's true, but studying Tudor food culture reminds us of the importance of reconnecting with nature.
Of appreciating the seasonality of food.
And of valuing the hard work of those who grow and produce our food.
And perhaps there are some practical lessons we can learn from them as well. Their emphasis on preservation, for example, is something we could all benefit from rediscovering.
Absolutely. Not only is it a way to reduce food waste, but it also allows us to enjoy the flavors of summer long after the season has passed.
And think about their resourceful use of ingredients. They had to be creative and made do with what they had, which often resulted in surprisingly delicious and innovative dishes.
It's a reminder that we don't always need fancy ingredients or complicated techniques to create a satisfying meal.
Sometimes the simplest dishes made with fresh seasonal ingredients are the most delicious.
And that's a lesson that's just as relevant today as it was in Tudor England.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our exploration of Tudor food, I think it's safe to say that there's much more to this culinary world than we might have imagined.
It's a story of resourcefulness, ingenuity, and a deep connection to the land and its seasons.
And it's a story that we can all learn from no matter what our culinary background or interests.
So the next time you're planning a meal, why not take a moment to think about the Tudors?
Consider the seasonality of your ingredients
Experiment with simple recipes.
and appreciate the journey that your food has taken to get to your plate.
And if you're looking for some inspiration, be sure to check out Brigida Webster's book, Eating with the Tudors, Food and Recipes.
It's a fantastic resource for anyone who wants to learn more about this fascinating period of culinary history.
And don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more fascinating journeys into the world of knowledge.
Until next time, keep exploring. It's amazing what we can learn from a culture and their food, isn't it? Like, it's not just about eating. It's a window into their values, beliefs, their struggles, and even their triumphs.
You're absolutely right. And the Tudor era, with its vibrant and often surprising food culture, gives us such a fascinating glimpse into the past.
We've already talked about so much, from the four humors and sumptuary laws to those ingenious food preservation techniques. But before we wrap up, I want to know more about the fruits and veggies on the Tudor table. What did they eat?
Well, they could only eat what was grown locally and in season, of course, but they still had a surprisingly diverse range of produce.
I see Brigida mentioned they grew all sorts of vegetables, leeks, carrots, parsnips, a lot of which could even survive the winter outdoors. And they really loved apples and pears, which they stored so cleverly to enjoy in those colder months.
Exactly. And this focus on seasonal produce might seem trendy now, but it was just life for the Tudors. They worked with nature.
Makes you wonder if we've lost something with all the year-round availability of everything. Maybe there's something special about anticipating a certain fruit or vegetable and enjoying it at its peak.
You know, I think you're right. There's a real connection to the natural world in that.
So to wrap up our Tudor deep dive, I think we've learned there's more to this culinary world than we thought.
Absolutely.
It's a story of resourcefulness, ingenuity, and a deep connection to the land and its seasons.
And that connection is something we can all learn from.
Definitely. Maybe it's time we reconnect with those rhythms of nature ourselves and savor the simple pleasures of fresh, seasonal food. Good food really does transcend time.
It does. And if you want to explore Tudor cuisine more, I highly recommend Brigida Webster's book, Eating with the Tudors, Food and Recipes.
It's a fantastic blend of history and culinary expertise that'll make you want to try a Tudor feast yourself.
And who knows, maybe you'll discover a new favorite dish.
Or rediscover the joy of eating in harmony with the seasons. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those taste buds tingling.